Good evening, everyone. How are you all doing tonight? I'm so excited to be here doing this. I'm going to wait an extra minute or two to see if anybody else cycles on in. Oh my gosh, Heather, Ari, Cindy, Igni, Shayna. Oh, my dear friends, it's good to see you. I'm very happy that you're all here. It's a very untraditional way to do a poetry reading, and it's going to be much more casual and informal than a poetry reading would normally be like, because typically, well, usually at a poetry reading, somebody else is doing the introductions, another person might be handling, an event, like a live event, but obviously considering the pandemic and everything, well, we're going to do it virtually because it's much safer to do that. And now that I think about it, it might be very, convenient for many considering it's being recorded. So if people can't turn in right now specifically, well, people can go back and watch it later. So the perks of technology, I suppose. Let's hope that technology works well for us this evening, right? Thank you, Whitney. I'm glad that you like my plaid shirt. I was very specific about what I wanted to wear this evening, and I was feeling plaid, so always wins me over. So, okay. Welcome to my debut reading for my book, Carbon Footprint. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but of course, like I mentioned, due to the pandemic, it's been a little bit complicated figuring that out. But here we are doing it now. It's very standard for a debut reading to happen whenever a book is released. And in many ways, I'm still trying to grasp the fact that I can hold a collection of my work in my hands, that my work is out there finally, and that now I'm able to actually read some of my work in a semi-formal capacity. It's very nice and very moving for me. So if I cry, don't judge me too harshly, okay? I probably won't, but you know what I mean. So, before I begin reading pieces from my book, I have about 8 poems selected from my book that I'm going to read for you. I'm going to first read a poem written by another poet, the poet Meg Day, who is a very influential poet in my life. This is from Day's book, The Last Psalm at Sea Level, which is one of my favorite collections of poems because, well, let's just say that it very much is about healing in a way, kind of like my own book is. So, um, to begin, this book or this poem is titled If There Had Been Time for Healing. Okay, and it's a short poem. If there had been time for healing, I would have done it on the road, carved out a corner of that map and lost myself in its thick clustered veins. I double back on potholed highways and stop alongside those lined with poppies, stand and watch my shadow lean into crisp orchards, heart open like cracked blacktop, expanding in the sun. One of my favorite poems. It's such a beautiful piece because healing is very much for me this ongoing journey, and I think that's the case for many people. And yeah. So I'm gonna be like, as I read through these poems, I'm gonna be talking about a few details related to my book. Um, of course, specifically related to the individual poems themselves, but I also will be talking a little bit about the process of where this book started, versus where it's at now and how like many changes it went through, so on and so forth. So Tiffany's here. It's good to see you. Arpy's here. I'm so excited. Okay, so um, if those of you who do have my book, you'll probably when you went through it, you probably noticed that it's divided into 3 sections, and that division is very significant for me because this book is formatted as though it is a healing process in of itself. So the beginning of it, its first section, it's titled "The Fossils Are Waging War." It's largely about like kind of dredging up those negative past events, those traumas, and kind of confronting them head on. They are the fossils waging war. The middle section is kind of that acceptance, the hesitant excavation, and then the last section, the open reliquary, is um, an acknowledgement of the person that we become after we heal, after we confront those traumas, of course. So yeah, this book, like my goal for it was to kind of frame it like it's an archaeological dig, and um, and it's essentially taking those negative experiences and trying to turn them into something empowering, because at the end of the day, despite many of these negative things being a thing, I do feel as though I've grown considerably, and I've learned how to accept um, who I've become and who I'm still continuing to grow into, right? So Tiffany Grace here. Tiffany asks, would you consider releasing your book as an audiobook? I've been thinking about that. If you do need an audio version of the book, I'm fairly sure I could send one to you personally. RP as well. Hopefully, I'm hoping to eventually get it put on Kindle too. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So, also toward the end of the stream, I will be answering some questions. So if you have any questions that come up as the reading progresses, please don't hesitate to ask. All right. So this first poem is a very special poem to me, and it's been a pretty popular poem at readings, and a lot of my friends really like it. So I decided to read it. It is one of my favorites too because it's a little bit nerdy, and I love nerdy things. This first poem is from the first section of my book, and it's titled Mordor Heights, and it is definitely inspired by my high school experience, which, let's just say, was not a very pleasant experience. So, and for those of you who do not know what Mordor is a fictional country or land in the Lord of the Rings or the Tolkien universe, the place where the Dark Lord Sauron thrives. Mordor Heights. I told my locker mate, take my extra space. Coatless hooks and bookless shelves told stories I was too afraid to tell. Heavy book bag abrasions were battle scars. I carried everything I owned through hallways, and I knew I took up too much space. Every morning at 7:30, I was Frodo Baggins, dodging arrows, tiptoeing through forests of upperclassmen. I usually found hidden roots around the football players, but no dwarf-made mithril shirts protected me, especially when they'd say, "You're so gay." It would sting like a sharpened blade. So I mined what confidence I had, and I gave it to teachers. They'd let me stay, hide in classroom caves or lab glades. Trolls paced on marble roads, glared in at me. This hobbit never made it to Mordor, never saved the day, because there was too much gay and never enough brave. And that's Mordor Heights. I like when I wrote this, I think it was back in 2016, 2015 or 16, and um I really focused a lot on how there were very few things in high school that were good. Like there were some good things, but a lot of it was just this constant everyday, hell, I would argue, because of a lot of bullying. I mean, growing up in a rural area, and I wasn't out at that time, but people, because I was small, had a high voice and had specific mannerisms, people knew that I was gay. They knew I was a gay man, and um, they would often make it a joke. They would often, physically retaliate, find reasons to publicly humiliate. And the truth is, like, that's where this poem came from. It was my way of just trying to make sense of all of that that happened. Oh, I love you guys too. Thank you. Thank you. Hashtag we are Frodo. I love that. I love that. You know, it's interesting. Shayna, I like that you mentioned we are Frodo because people really hate on Frodo a lot because Frodo, like people thought that Frodo Baggins in the Lord of the Rings movies especially was like very whiny and very, you know, burdensome, I guess, on the other characters around him. But when you think about it, he was carrying the weight of the world. And for a lot of LGBTQ plus people or other marginalized groups growing up in a rural area, it almost feels like to us we're carrying the entire world when our only reality is, you know, this hellscape of being, you know, bullied continuously. So I really thank you, Shayna, for providing that parallel right there. That hashtag that was really interesting. So, but yeah, so the next poem that the next poem that I wrote is another kind of sad, kind of like a bittersweet poem. Um, and as you, if you've read my work, you know that I'm pretty known for sad yet bittersweet commentary on things. And well, the truth is, I think when it comes to healing, people have a lot of painful realizations that may feel cathartic, you know, but they still sting at the same time. And I think that's why I really am passionate about writing um, pieces like this. And this poem is titled Boys Will Be Boys. Okay. And this is largely more so about middle school than high school. Um, so here we go. I'll talk a little bit more about its details afterward, okay? Boys will be boys. Recess was always the worst, a time when excess became the ideal best. We'd shift across the playground stage, tried to impress the girls, arm wrestled each other, and stood proud on monkey bars like Kong atop a skyscraper. Every day, competition was our ceremony, our rite of passage. Whoever ran the fastest, spat the furthest, yelled the loudest was the quarterback who determined those in every pack. Some of us never measured up, but at least we took pride in something. We sat on sidelines with worth measured in how often we'd hear queer or wimp. At least we were seen, though, right? Today, fathers, brothers, uncles, and friends still measure us against macho men and carefully wait to see if we play that game of football, drink that bottle of beer, drive that stick shift, or slay that desired deer. With subtle precision, they mansplain masculinity, teach us stoicism, shape us into pressure cookers like volcanoes with granite lids. They tell us to let our cuts bleed, to play in dirt until our emotional dysfunction suctions us into mud fugues. Even now, our upper lips stiffen at the thought of breaking down, so we harden our blood into concrete and swig a beer to hide our frown. Today, we hide in bathrooms, the only safe place to let our molten interiors out. We stare at who we've become in mirrors and strain to understand what manhood's all about. That's Boys Will Be Boys. The title is in quotes for a very specific reason, because I cannot begin to tell you how many times I have been told, boys will be boys. And Arby, you're right. It is very much about toxic masculinity. I think a lot of people in the LGBTQ plus community have a very unique battle with toxic masculinity, especially internalized toxic masculinity, because we are in the struggle of wanting to appear normal to everyone else, to act normal, to have normal, quote unquote, straight guy acting mannerisms. And when we don't measure up in that way, we're deemed less than, you know? And of course, that obviously has a lot to do with how women are still villainized. Anything feminine is still villainized. So it's a very interesting battle that a lot of people have to face, especially in the LGBTQ plus community. And my goal with that poem was to draw some awareness to um, that unique battle with that. So, um, Lauren's here. It's good to see you. Oh, Cindy says it's like autistic people passing as neurotypical to survive. It is true. It's so true. We're always trying to put on this facade, you know, this facade that makes us seem socially acceptable. And after a while, that just gets exhausting. It's exhausting. And we spend so much energy investing our effort into being someone who we're not. And when we do finally kind of, I don't know, kind of like break the surface of that, we realize how much time we've wasted, you know, being someone else. So I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Not just men, but a lot of people. But again, like I mentioned earlier, in the LGBTQ plus community, that battle is a very unique one that's often under discussed. So, well, the next poem is actually a love poem. I figured I would lighten things up a little bit with a love poem. So notice I have like everything tabbed. It felt really weird defacing my book, putting tabs in it, but the inner organized person in it, like it inside me that isn't often let out is nerding out over having some form of organization. Okay. So, I do have a couple of love poems I'm reading tonight. Um, I when I first started writing poetry, I wrote either two types of poems. When I was like a baby poet, I would write poems about feeling sad, very very dark poems. You know, the very standard emo poems that you would find in high school. Um, But I also wrote, like, these bleeding heart, hopeless romantic poems, and for a long time since I started growing as a writer, I think as poets, we're often taught that we shouldn't get over sentimental in poems, but I have found confidence in disagreeing with that, because I think sentiment is so important, because it's part of human emotion, and poetry is an exploration of the human condition, okay? So I got a little bit more comfortable in recent years writing love poems, love poems that are, of course, much more mature than they used to be when I was in high school and below. So Cindy says rules are meant to be broken, and I could not agree more with that. Heather, hashtag baby poets unite. I love that we're coming up with all these hashtags tonight. This makes me so happy. So I wrote this poem about my partner Britton, very significant person in my life, as you might understand. If you've known me for a long time, you know my prior horrible luck in the love department, and now that I finally found somebody who is unbelievably good to me, I want to celebrate that as often as I possibly can. So this poem is titled Ley Lines. Ley Lines. It's hardest when he's far away, because his finger graze traces my scalp like a past life memory. It's hardest when he's far away, because my clothes, infused with his cologne, are cocoons swaddling me in the childhood safety I never knew. It's hardest when he's far away, because I draw hearts on my dusty phone screen while he works, hoping I may cross his thoughts. It's hardest when he's far away because the ley lines he leaves in my bed still smile, still tell me I'm his perfect. It's hardest when he's far away because I fathom the things between us, the vast forests, the church-dotted towns, the creeks that spiral. It's hardest when he's far away, yet somehow I still stretch across these ley lines, fill myself with what he leaves behind. I'm a pond only he comes to drink from, unkempt, yet still preserved after all this time, a basin with depths only he can measure. That's ley lines. So, funny thing about this specific poem. Oh, Mike is here. Hi, Mike. It's good to see you. Funny thing about this poem. So, there are two different types of ley lines that I have in here. So, the first would be ley lines, Lay lines, like ley lines in a bed, like, when you get up from a couch or a bed and you can see like the indentation of the person who is laying. Gabriel's here too. Hi. It's good to see you. Um, So there's those ley lines, but ley lines are the lines. They're kind of like these mythological lines that have been invented, like these geological lines connecting the different wonders of the world, and there's like a very spiritual significance of it. So I wanted to include that in this poem because when I lived far away from my partner and did not live with him, which is when I wrote this, I felt like I really focused on how we are connected through the land, the trees, the creeks that connect us, if that makes sense. And that's a very that's something that's very important that I write about for me because I feel like being LGBTQ plus, a lot of us struggle with feeling connected to people, especially when we weren't out of the closet. We spent so much time creating fictional connections by being someone who we're not, and not genuine connections. And I really wanted this book to include that, include my journey of like finding those connections and making them significant. So yeah. So that was Ley Lines. Thank you. Thank you. Um, so the next poem, I'm realizing we're at like almost 25 minutes already. Look at me blabbing. It's what I do best. I love doing it. Um, so the next poem is dedicated to my paternal grandmother, Frances Winter. And she was a very significant person to me because I basically grew up at her house. My parents would work a lot, and she would obviously babysit my brother and I for a long time. And I became very close to her. And she passed away this year, marks 17 years ago. She passed away back in 2003. And my grandmother's house, notably, is located next to my parents' house. So, like, they were within close proximity. And after my grandmother passed away, I really had a difficult time going into the house because it was so empty, so vacant, and it was just difficult. And within the past couple of years, I went into the house for the first time in a long time, and I felt her presence there in a way. And in many ways, like, whenever I write, I think about my grandmother because no matter what I would ever do, I would always do it to make her proud of me, um, and I feel like I hope wherever she is, that she is proud of me still, if that makes sense. That's super sentimental, but that's where this comes from. So this poem is about me venturing back into my grandma's house for the first time. It's called The Cinder Blocks Remember. Fingerprints are fossils on countertops, and the thermostat has forgotten its function. Each room sits preserved like abandoned museum exhibits, and the walls creak as they waken with my footfalls. The house stirs back, but strains to breathe. My father's voice lingers in the background and speaks to the beat of these dry 1960 beams. I take out my phone to capture this space and smile as its futuristic glow seems out of place. But I must record to remember. I wonder if these clouds recognize me. I've grown up, and all perspectives have changed. Tables have shrunk, and the ceiling fan strings tickle my forehead like willow branches combing across a late summer yard. At first, I'm a time traveler, but so much is the same. I'm 13, and each window is a matte painting, framing every familiar view. A field rolls toward an amber sunset. The jack pine waves hello in the kitchen, and the woods stretch behind. Yes, Grandma's house is cold now, but underneath rotted composite, a desperate layer of pastel blue, and a coat of forgotten pink. These cinder blocks still remember. So, the last part of that poem, it's actually kind of a funny story. So my dad and I were at my grandmother's house, and we were looking at like the brick foundation of the house. And for some unknown reason, I think it was like in the 60s, my family decided to paint the foundation this grayish blue color, a dreadful blue color, but this blue color was chipping, and underneath of it, prior to that, when the house was built, it was painted this pink color. I was like I was just like, "Wow." I like, as a kid, being in that house so much, thought that I knew every aspect of of those 4 walls, and then seeing that was just very it was just very interesting. Something I didn't know. Oh, thank you all. I really appreciate your kind comments. So, uh, the next poem is a little bit darker. You weren't escaping the darker poems, trust me. I've actually never performed this poem. This is the first time I've ever performed this piece, and I just want to provide a trigger warning because it does discuss uh, suicidal ideation. So if you struggle with that and you want to skip this poem, just consider this your content warning for that. I dedicate this poem to both of my grandmothers. My grandmother on my mom's side, Rita Harper, and my grandmother, Frances Winter. I loved them both dearly, but I had very, very different relationships with them. My relationship with my grandma on my mom's side was not always the best. Let's just say it was very difficult sometimes. Oh, Deb's here. Hi, Deb. It's good to see you. Tiffany, dark is best. I do like myself a good dark poem from time to time. All right. This poem is titled The Seeds Grandma Kept in Pill Bottles. I wanted to die the first time at 9. I can't remember why. When the red stool pleated in creaks beneath my tippy toes, I told myself it was stronger. As I reached for the closest pill bottle to end it all, the world was too big to handle. And while one grandmother told me I'm too old for this body, I justified that old souls die young. The other grandmother planted a jack pine inside my center and kept it watered, just to grow and skip past childhood. I wanted to die the first time at 9. I know the reason why, as each venomous word she spoke still brands inside. I was never enough. As I made my final strain, the pill bottle fell, with my reach too small to handle. and it shattered against worn kitchen linoleum. I knew it wasn't my time, because the seeds inside were filled too full for this interval to end. So now I plant those green beans to let go, because the harvest is forgiving. So my grandmother had like a lot of like kind of like homeopathic medications and a lot of like actual medications, but she would save all of her pill bottles and put seeds in them to plant in the spring. And the bottle that I thought that I was grabbing for, I thought had pills in it because I was feeling like I was in a very dark place. And that realization that those pills were seeds made me realize that my grandmother, in an inadvertent way, saved me. And and I wanted to dedicate this to my other grandmother because my other grandmother was the one who would often say very, very harmful things. But despite that, like as she grew older, our relationship improved and I learned to forgive. And that's part of the reason why I chose to end it the way I did, because the true fruitful harvest is learning how to forgive despite what people do, you know? I hope that makes sense. Oh no, Shayna, I'm sorry you're crying. If I had tissues, I would provide some. I'm glad that you enjoyed the poem. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. It was very difficult reading that one. It's a very vulnerable piece, probably one of the most vulnerable ones in this entire collection, but I felt that it deserved the light of day, let's just say. Oh, I love you all. Thank you so much. You're all very sweet. So, the next poem that I would like to read for you all tonight is the title poem of my book. It's Carbon Footprint. Um, this is consequently one of the last poems I wrote. I believe the last one that I read and this poem that I'm about to read were the last two that I decided to put in this collection. And both of these are in the last section of the book. And I mean, I haven't really touched on this quite yet, but most of you know how passionate I am about the environment, and my both of my grandmothers kind of infused me with that passion because they both loved gardening and they loved nature, and that's where I get it from, and I try to celebrate it. And like I do want this book, I hope that it's considered also a love letter to our planet because I've always viewed our bodies as being much like our planet. You know, we take on trauma when negative things happen to us. It reflects in how we shift and how we change, much like it does with the planet. And I think we need to respect our planet as a body. You know, we need to respect what we do, you know. So this poem, that's where this poem came from. It's titled Carbon Footprint. The sun seems angry this summer as each day measures in asphalt cracks. The remaining grass patches beneath the backyard maples have gone arid, and their crisps are muffled under each footfall like the pops of bacon in a pan, while the pride flag, bleached and frayed, whispers as it waves July goodbye on a humid wind. As I shift with shortening shadows, I pray with roadside chicory for respite, and sing for rain with a passing oriole whose beak has grown leaden in this drought. Even the stationary tractor in the field creaks and hides behind heat ripples like a man made mirage. Dear planet, let this summer pass. Let this industrial standstill reinvigorate your hope in us. Permit those storm heads to peak above the west, long enough to swallow the sun. Retract these swords of grass to their sheaths, and give us the baptismal downpour necessary to soak the brine from our veins, to erode the walls we build, to keep you contained. This pandemic's been very interesting, because I really do feel like it's helped a lot of people, helped remind a lot of people that there is a world out there. There are forests and mountains and, things out there that we should enjoy, Tiffany Gray, asphalt. I always say asphalt, but it's not pronounced that way, and I struggle with saying the word asphalt because I'm just like, oh, but there's a reason. There's a reason for it. But yeah, that one is Carbon Footprint. Spontaneously, I decided to add in another poem because why not? Let me look at my table of contents to remember where it is. This poem, if I remember correctly, this is one of my friend Ari's favorite poems, and I decided to read it because it kind of reflects that significance that we place when it comes to nature. So let's see, 68. This poem is titled Satellites. Ironically, I wrote this poem about petunias. A couple years ago, over the summer, I bought a flat of petunias from a local grocery store, and they were called cosmic petunias or galaxy petunias, and they looked like they had little constellations on them. So they inspired me to write this piece. Interestingly, because, well, inspiration can come from about anywhere. So this is Satellites. We never see the forces that coax us along orbits, paths we pretend are elliptical but are actually shapes that have no name. The structured frustrations we grow comfortable with batter our surfaces with gamma rays, burst that anger bubble between our cerebral hemispheres with tectonic intent, slow, plotting, a convection of distraction that ebbs away from the shadow places kept inside. We lay down roots, but keep ourselves shallow, play hide and seek with a thought of never stopping. Our sights stay in tunnel vision wormholes, sculpted in place by the electromagnetic expectations of others. But in the oddest, unpredictable moments, despite all these artificial forces I pretend are real, I stop to stare at the milky spiral overhead, a pathway I never thought was there until I actually looked. Sometimes the satellites we see are mirrors, refractory scopes that paint our interiors across the infinite. And that's Satellites. I don't know, I was just feeling like this very universal, sublime feeling when I wrote that piece. Like this realization that we're always on the move, we're always working, doing something, making ourselves busy, yet we never take the time to sit back and just acknowledge the phenomenal things around us. Maggie's here. It's good to see you, Maggie. Thank you for tuning in tonight. So, I have a couple more poems, and then if you have any questions, I'll leave a couple of minutes toward the end for questions. So, here we go. The next poem is a love poem. So, this is another poem that I decided to throw in at the last minute. I wrote this poem for my partner, Britton, for our first Valentine's Day. I was scared out of my mind because in the past, whenever I had written poems for guys, like, they would just make a joke out of it, like, "Oh, Donnie's being over sentimental, he's being ridiculous or, too mushy." But I felt the confidence to write this one because, well, he's my person. So this poem is titled Snow Day. The Sauvignon sits on the coffee table, a gasoline that gets us through Pokemon battles. Entrails from last night's snowstorm slither away, leaving us battened inside, a pleasant cabin fever. Slowly, sunlight refracts through wine, casts amber across the table and onto you. There you sit, one leg draped across mine, the other stretched across the table. We knot ourselves together until we lose where we're intertwined. Yet, as the couch swallows us whole, we laugh and sip our glasses of hard-earned wine. You smile at me as I doze and call my name to keep me awake. The butterflies that infest my chest carry me beyond the exosphere, where even 1,000 suns pale in the wake of knowing you're still here. You're perfect, you say in a daze, as you reach over to rub my scruff. As the Sauvignon gets low, you pour more and teach me I am good enough. That's Snow Day. Another thing that really inspired this poem was well, all of you know how obsessed I am with the band Evanescence. My favorite song ever is the song Good Enough, and I wanted to include that to honor that in some way because that song has literally saved my life. But this poem is very special to me, and and so far I know a lot of my friends and a lot of our mutual friends that he and I share really enjoy it because one of the first questions we've gotten is like, are there any love poems in that about your significant other? And I'm like, yes, there are for sure, most certainly love poems. In fact, I always say this, I firmly believe there needs to be more gay love poems in this world. I might write a whole collection of them at some point. We'll see what happens with that. All right, my friends, we're at the last poem I'm going to read for tonight. Okay. P.S. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here, like taking 45 whole minutes out of your days just to be here to listen to me read some pieces. Thank you. So, this last poem is very dear, and I wanted to end this whole collection on a very specific, uplifting note. Lacey's here too. Hi, Lace. I wanted to end it on a very specific note, a note that hopefully demonstrates this realization that I've become this fortified, stronger, confident human being, despite of all of those negative things that have happened before. And just to give you some context about this poem, I started writing it when I spent the night at my childhood home at my parents' house. I stayed the night in my childhood bedroom, which I had not been in a long time. Of course, it was like this mess because it's been kind of like this storage room too. And I just spent the entire evening like looking at all of the junk spilling out of my closet. I spent the night looking up at these old, like, plastic stars, glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck to the ceiling when I was a kid, and they're still there, and they still glow to this day. And I wanted to use those images and create something. So, this poem came from that. And additionally, I dedicated this poem to my dear friend who has now passed. His name is Ace London, and he was a gay rights activist and believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And when we first met a long time ago, he recognized that I was always insecure about my voice, insecure about being an activist, and he was the one that guided me toward feeling more confidence in what I have to say. And and I wanted to honor him with this. So this is for you, Ace. My closet is a reliquary. The closet door has fallen from its track and sits, leaned against the dented drywall like a discarded portcullis too weathered to keep me. Behind box-stacked skyscrapers, yellowed wallpaper peels, and the crayon mural still robs floral print of its optic illusion, like a political graffiti with elementary verve. The shelves still dip under collections of unread religious texts, and the bloated plastic drawers refuse to budge from their cheap retail compartments as each paper-filled basin brims. The air is linen stale, and the glued constellations above still keep this room lit, while the tired July sun slips beneath the tree line, lengthening each shadow across the brown shag carpet. These years later, I keep the closet door off its track because it's powerless, a prison-made museum, a memorialized womb left open since I left for college after a second birth. Now, my closet has lost its echo, and each stored memory maps a misshapen journey. So, let these paper roadways return to nature, become overgrown, because this cluttered closet is a reliquary, a room for storage, unable to keep me. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you all being here. So, the closet door will never keep me again. And I hope that that is a point that a lot of LGBTQ plus people reach to. And I hope that maybe in some way this book helps people who feel like they are shut off or confined by the boxes we create in society. The boxes that tell us you're different, you're the other, you're some sort of anomaly, you know. So I'm going to open up a couple of final minutes here for questions if anybody has any questions. Um, thank you. Heather's like standing applause. Cindy, that's a very sweet comment. Thank you. So if anybody has any like just quick questions, feel free. And RP, yes, you may, of course. I'll let for a few questions. I'll wait for those to file in for a moment, and then I'll answer them. But while I do wait, if you have not gotten a copy of my book yet, there is a link in the description of this video, and you can go to that link and get a copy on Amazon if you feel comfortable with doing so. Additionally, if you've already read it and you would like to leave a review, I would really appreciate it. I always value everyone's thoughts. Um, so all right. So I'm gonna ask a few of these or answer a few of these questions. So let's see here. Tiffany Gray, my dear Tiffany Gray, asks, "How did Britain react to the poems about him?" Well, I'm fairly sure, if I remember correctly, that on Valentine's Day, I read Snow Day for him, and he was really moved by it. He looked like he was about to cry, but I don't think he would admit to that. But he would really like he really enjoyed it. He found it very meaningful, and I think I read ley lines for him once at it was at a reading though, and he enjoyed it as well. So um, he's all like he often will I don't think he'll admit this either, but he will often gush a little bit about Snow Day. Like, he'll be like, "Yeah, like this poem he wrote for me is published," and it makes me blush usually. In fact, he still has the copy that I originally wrote him. See that piece of paper up there on that cork board? That's the original poem that I wrote. It's still up there. So it's very sweet, very sweet. So let me go through more of these questions here. Let's see. Do. Um, Cindy. Okay, so I hope that that answered your question too, Cindy. There are like I mostly just read him the love poems because, well, um, I like to gush like that. Um, Maggie, let's see here. Maggie, who is a former student of mine, thank you for joining me. It makes me so happy that you're here. There's a few of my former and current students who are tuning in for this too. So, um, okay, so Maggie asks, what would you say is your habit of art? Do you have a routine to get in the poetic mind space, or you just tend to write with spontaneity? That's an excellent question. Um, I would say when I was younger, like when I was in college, I would just write spontaneously whenever I wanted because I had the time to do it. Now that I have a lot of other obligations, I have to make the time to do it. So I usually every night for like maybe 30 minutes to an hour, especially this year. The pandemic has actually made it kind of convenient for me to do this, but this year I've been trying to spend an hour every night either reading or writing or both. And that's actually how I managed to finish the last um, say like 80% or last 20% of my book over the summer. Is I was just like, I got time to do this. I'm gonna do it. So just kind of like carving out a specific time in the evening because I'm usually really creative in the evening. Another habit I got into was making sure that I always had writing utensils or a notebook nearby. I have a shelf full of notebooks that I will like jot things down in. And even if I don't have a notebook with me, I have a phone, I have a device. I will sometimes record certain lines that come to my mind and send them to myself. Um, or keep them in like the memo section of my phone at times. But usually I prefer to handwrite ideas. But I hope that answers your question. That's kind of my routine. So I think of writing as my reward. So I get through my whole day getting work done. And then I have that writing and reading as a reward at the end of the day. So it's pretty good motivation for me. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Maggie. Um, Deb, adore you, Deb, and I miss you. I adore and miss all of you because obviously it's been a while since I've seen many of you. Um, let's see. Um, did you speak about people who inspire you or your poetry, who inspire my work? Okay, so the first, you said you missed the short beginning of this. I did comment on how Meg Day is one of my favorite poets. And I read a piece from Meg Day's book, Last Summit's Sea Level. I am also very much inspired by Mary Lambert, who is a poet, musician, and spoken word artist. And like her and I have met in person before, and she knows my work. And having her recognize my name when I met her and recognize me for my poetry was super duper amazing. And I cried over that. Um, it was just so validating. So both of them inspire my work. I'm often inspired, like I'm inspired by my dear friends and family and my partner. I'm inspired by the world around me. I'm inspired by a lot of music. A lot of these poems were written while listening to music like Enya and the Lord of the Rings soundtracks, uh, Godzilla soundtracks, Lady Gaga, Evanescence, Linkin Park, a whole variety of different musicians. And I tried to credit most of them in the back section of the book. So I would say that those are my largest inspirations. And of course, my grandparent, my grandmothers, and Ace. I dedicated this book to them, so they are definitely part of my inspirations too. All right, so a few more questions here. Cindy asks, which poem? Oh, I missed one. Igni asks, Um, would you be interested in collaborating in a short fan fiction story? Your poetic wording with my descriptive writing would work wonderfully together. I would love to do that. Fan fiction writing is one of my favorite things to do. Probably after the school semester is over, I will probably have more time to do that, but I would love to do that. I love collaborating with people. Let's see here. Cindy asks, which poem was the hardest to do? Let me look at my book really quick. There were a few that were really hard. I think I'm still gonna, because I know I've mentioned this before, I think, but there are 2 poems that were the hardest. The first one is probably "Letter from a Self-Deprecator," which is toward the beginning. I've there's another video on my channel here where I've read it, so if you wanna go check out that video, it's up. That was a really hard poem to write, mostly because of the formatting of it. The poem was written as though there are 2 poems in 1 poem. So, actually 3 poems in 1 poem. So that like, getting that to work out was very challenging. And I would probably say the absolute most difficult poem is "The Seeds Grandma Kept in Pill Bottles." That was very difficult to write because I kind of had to place myself in that headspace that I was in when I originally experienced that. So, let's see here. Shayna asks, my work has a poetry workshop and we share poems by poets to inspire coworkers. May I have your permission to share yours in a future workshop? Sure, please do. If anybody ever wants to use my poems or my book, I would be more than honored. It would make me very, very happy. In fact, one of my colleagues and dear friends just told me that he taught one of my poems in one of his literature classes recently. And of course, I trying not to cry over that because that's kind of like a dream of mine too, you know. Tiffany asks, is Celtic Woman also an inspiration? Yes, I actually there were a few in here that I did listen to Celtic Woman too. I think I forgot to put Celtic Woman in the back matter of the book though. I had so much to put in that, like, there's a few musicians I forgot to include, unfortunately. Igni, if you wanna talk about it on Twitter, feel free. Yes. Alright, I'm gonna just go all the way up into an hour, so if there are any final questions, now is the time to ask. So, while, while you while I wait for maybe another question or 2, um I do wanna give you an update on my next collection of poems. It's really funny considering this one took me, like, 4 years to write. Um, let's just say my next collection is already about a quarter of the way finished. It's let's just say it's getting there. It's moving much faster than this book went, so I'm really excited about where it's going. I'm not gonna reveal any details about it yet because I'm still I'm still figuring out certain aspects of it. Okay. Tiffany asks, "Do you think you might write a poem about the character Smeagol someday, or the character Gollum from Lord of the Rings?" Actually, there is a poem that I am working on that uses that character as inspiration. Like, my next collection is gonna have a lot of Lord of the Rings influence in it, so and I tried teasing that a little bit because at the beginning of this collection, I put in a quote from Tolkien. So this is probably the last question that I will answer. Igni asks, "Do you find certain subjects, within poems were easier slash more natural to write than others?" Yes. Um, Writing like, I could write about toxic masculinity until the end of time because, like, I really wanna talk about it. It's affected me so much that I could discuss it in a variety of different ways, let's just say. Um, I love writing about nature imagery. I feel like using natural imagery, like tree, forest, water imagery, comes to me the easiest, and you'll probably note that based on the cover of the book and based on a lot of the images in the poem. So, those come to me naturally. So, um, Gabriel asks, we should do a video chat sometime. I would love that. I would love that. All right, my friends. Well, we are at an hour. We've gone over. You've stayed here with me for an extra 15 minutes. Thank you. So if you've not gotten a copy of my book yet, you can find it on Amazon. If you'd like to leave a review, please do. Click like on my video, share it around, subscribe to this channel. And if you can share my book around, word of mouth really helps. I really appreciate all of you being here with me and celebrating this very significant moment in my life as a writer. So thank you. Keep on writing, keep on being creative, and have a great night. Bye.